Welcome to Design As, a show that's intended to speculate on the future of design from a range of different perspectives. I'm Lee Moreau. This season, we're bringing you 6 new episodes with 6 new keywords to interrogate. And this is the first of our 2 bonus episodes. As you've been hearing so far, we recorded this season at the Design Research Society's conference in Boston. So in addition to our roundtables, we wanted to get you exclusive access to recordings from the conference itself. In this bonus episode, you'll hear my conversation with Giorgia Lupi, information designer and a partner at Pentagram, who you just heard in our previous episode, Design as Care. We talked about her personal design practice, which I think has broad implications in the craft and the way we think about information design. And I think that in a world that's changing so quickly, the value of creating different approaches like Giorgia's to design is important. As technical domains are advancing, things are moving really fast. This is just a different approach because we want more than just a one-size-fits-all way of looking at the world. Also, you'll hear some references to the visuals on screen. We were able to get those from Giorgia, so if you want the full experience, you can listen and even watch this episode, as you can all of our episodes, on our YouTube channel. Now, here's my conversation with Giorgia Lupi. Please welcome Giorgia Lupi.
Thanks so much, Lee, for the intro. I'm really excited to be here. This is such a wonderful theater. So my name is Giorgia. I'm from Italy originally, but I've been living in New York for the past 13 years. And the title of this portion of the conference is Design for Recovery. And I'll get to the last project I'm going to show you, which really has to do with the topic. But to begin with, I want to give you a sense of what I do, how I do it, and why I think it's interesting. I define myself as an information designer, and that means that every day with my team, I shape and design the different ways that my clients and their clients access different kind of information, and specifically in my case, data. So data that can be qualitative or quantitative, big or small, data that organizations already have, or actually that most of the time it's crafted by myself and my team in collaboration with our clients. And data that we then represent visually, translating numbers into images through data visualization and through building interactive experiences with these visualizations. I'm a partner at Pentagram, which is the largest independent design agency made of 23 partners. I joined as a partner 5 years ago in the New York office. And Pentagram is traditionally known for brand identity design, and so logos and word marks, but also packaging, editorial design, book design, exhibitions. Maybe you recognize some of these logos that are designed by my partners. So what I introduced with my team is data as one of the tools, the material that we have to express a story, a brand, a content in the physical space, and more. And really, data is a design tool for me. It's my favorite design material. And the things that you can do are quite cool from a design perspective with data, I think. But also data, it's more than that to me. Personally, data is also my way of seeing the world, a bit of an obsession, if you will. It's a lens, a filter that I use to make sense of reality, one subject at a time. And through my life, I've been using data as my way to understand, to see better so many times. And this obsession apparently started pretty early in life. In retrospect, I've always been a data collector. So when I was a kid, my favorite pastime was going into my grandmother's tailor shop. She was a seamstress, and meticulously organize her tools. So buttons, threads, ribbons, and so on, according to a different principle every day. For example, if a button had 2 holes or 4 holes, of the lengths of ribbons and their colors. And my grandmother was not thrilled, but I had a lot of fun. And also, my mom a couple years ago reminded me that when I was probably 8 or 10 years old, I used to chart boys that I liked. This is actually a screenshot that she sent me while she was cleaning up all paper folders. So it's a very simple chart here. There are 4 boys that actually apparently I was interested in at the same time that I ranked every day on a scale of 1 to 10. So each horizontal square is 1 day for the month, kind of imprecise, I have to say, but I got the point. Poor Roberto was in traction at some point here. And on a similar topic, a few years ago, so jumping forward in time, I used it as my form of journaling and understanding in a time when I started dating after a breakup, after a 10-year-long relationship. I really felt the urge to track and understand through this lens what was going on, my expectations, what I wanted, what I liked in the process. It was really clarifying to me. And it looks from this spreadsheet that I've dated like hundreds of men, but no, it's just that those are dense notes for each individual date, and really almost my form of journaling in this organized way, if you will. And this personal documentation obsession of mine sometimes leads to something that I actually make. This is an example where I've been asked by Moleskine to use one of their notebooks as a material to reflect on the topic of time and then donate back the notebook to support the mission of the foundation to inspire young people. So I decided to use the notebook to reflect on my life so far. I disassembled 3 whole Moleskine notebooks and then reassembled them in an accordion that I counted and divided up all the pages into 14,496 tallies, one for each day of my life on Earth until the moment I was delivering the piece. So tallies that I first punched, 2 all for each one, and then individually I stitched with a white, almost imperceptible thread, and I have no idea what I signed up when I got excited about these concepts. I was stitching pretty much everywhere on my spare time, evenings and weekends in the car for many months. But then on top of these white stitches that were marking the days, I made second stitches using colored threads that individually marked important moments for me. So stitching the data set of my life as I wanted to remember it on top of it. Moments that I either just remembered or I previously noted in form of different data collection, from my first word when my mom told me that, to my first love, from important achievement to health scares, from losses in my family to moving. And here are some of the pages. And the final result is a visual archive of my memory that has been traveling in various exhibitions. But more than a definitive view of my life, I think it's a way to start a conversation about it. So, for example, people might ask, what is the red point there? What happened? How do you remember it? So a starting of a conversation, which I think all data is in the end. I've also used personal data collection and visualization to get to know another person that I didn't know before in a project that we call Dear Data. Another data visualization designer, her name is Stephanie Pozovec, who lives across the Atlantic in London. And I only met her once at a conference like this one in 2013 before the project, so I didn't know her. And for Dear Data, every week and for 1 year, we used our personal data to get to know each other. Personal data around weekly shared mundane topics, from our thoughts and ideas to our most intimate feelings, from our belongings to our apologies and laughters. And personal data that then we would manually hand-drawn on a postcard-sized sheet of paper that every week was sent from London to New York, where I live, and from New York to London, where she lives, for 1 entire year. The front was always the data drawing, pretty elaborate. And the back of the postcard contained the address of the other person and the legend, how to read our drawings. This was really laborious, even more than the Moleskine. So every postcard was unique. And in our daily data collection, we didn't only quantify the number of times that we did a certain thing. For example, not only quantifying the number of complaints, in this example where here the theme of the week was complaints, but instead really adding context and details about why, what was happening, what was the situation of the feeling, was the complaint necessary, and so on, what was it about? So really realizing week after week how to put ourselves in those numbers, and realizing the importance of adding qualitative aspects to make this data truly representative of ourselves. Creating these intimate portraits of ourselves to share with the other person through this invisible layer of data. So Dear Data got actually pretty viral unexpectedly, and the original collection of the postcards I found the most exciting home, as they've been acquired as part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, which has been quite nice. But what excited us even more is that Dear Data has been so well received from the public outside the data community. We've seen thousands of postcards made by people who are not even designers or artists who learned about the project and wanted to experiment on themselves. And even teachers of any grades are using this format to teach their students the world of data. And also to teach, a way to tell their own unique personal story. And I think you've seen so far that data can be a warm and human material to tell stories if it's thought of and used the right way. Because what is data? We often think as data as cold numbers and algorithms, and there's certainly that. But fundamentally, data is an abstraction of our reality, our activities, the context in which we perform that, an abstraction that we can use to parse our reality one subject at a time to see better. But to do so, we really have to embrace its most fundamental human qualities. This that you see here is a visual manifesto that I've made a few years ago that still guide my design work. I started to call what I do data humanism, where we see data for what they really are, representation of our imperfect and different lives, where we embrace their context and the fact that data is not an absolute truth, but rather an interesting explorative tool. But coming to the topic of today, I believe that, again, the main reason I'm on this stage is to show you this next project, which started with personal data collection again. It's, as Lee mentioned, a visual OpEd I published in the New York Times last December about my journey with long COVID. So long COVID, if you're not familiar with it, is an umbrella term that describes the various health consequences that some people have after an acute COVID infection or a reinfection. It can be mild and it can pass in a few months, or it can be extremely debilitating and disabling and leave you unable to attend the basic tasks of your daily life for years. Long COVID can be mild and can pass in a few months, or it can also be really extremely debilitating and disabling and, again, really leaving you unable to attend your life. So since my first COVID infection in 2020, and especially so after my reinfection in 2022, I started to develop constant debilitating and disabling symptoms. These are some of the pictures that I took at times during this journey, both at home and in the many medical settings I've been on. And at my worst in my journey, I was housebound and pretty much bedbound for months. And it's been extremely hard and challenging. And for a few months, I even had to stop working, which has been really the hardest for me. As I started to develop these undiagnosed symptoms, of course, I started to log data. So tracking the daily symptoms that my body was going through, such as extreme fatigue, dizziness, double vision, head pressure, nerve pain, heart palpitation, tinnitus, constant flu-like symptoms, and many more. Logging them together with the treatments I was trying, there's no known cure for long COVID, so doctors are really trying to help you, but again, it's all a trial and error. I've been logging biometrics for the smartwatch that I used to wear, what I was eating, and the general activities that I was doing, such as walking, commuting, and even the level of my stress. And I did it to understand possible correlation and help me and my doctors crack this mystery, but also to keep me sane in a moment of real uncertainty. And again, this is just a little snapshot of 4 years of collecting data. And at a certain point in my journey, I thought that I needed to share what I collected with people. In fact, when you read about long COVID, you usually read the list of symptoms that, for the way that they're put pen to paper, I think that a healthy person might think, oh, well, I'm tired too after work. I have headaches as well. Yeah, I had COVID a couple of weeks ago and I'm still fatigued. But I've never seen a thorough account that describes what it means to live with a disabling condition like this on a daily basis. So I decided to share my journey. I put together a piece for an editorial project to send to different newsrooms. So I shared what my goals were for the piece to showcase what it really looks like primarily and feels like to live with a chronic illness primarily, but together with some other points about how serious the disease is and the research that is still needed for it. In the pitch, I also, of course, shared how I imagine data to be the center of the story, the data that I already explained you that I collected, and adding that medical images of my many tests could be included. This is an example of my blood under a microscope, where these fluorescent spots here represent microclots and neutrophil nets in my blood. And for a healthy person, the whole thing would look pitch black, so you wouldn't really see anything forming. I thought we could also include snippets from my journals, even from the hardest moment where I truly didn't know if I could do this anymore. And I included what I thought the main visual language to representing my years of symptoms could be. Individual brush strokes, marking the days passing filled with these colored elements. And why paint brushes? Primarily because I started to paint these abstract and angry compositions at times during my journey as a way to soothe myself and release emotions, but also because this repetitive language that feels warm and imperfect felt right to capture the constant fluctuations of symptoms and the uncertainty about the future. And I started to include a sketch of what I imagined the flow to be for what it became an interactive long scroll, so a digital long scroll, from the beginning, opening to the interaction with the text that could tell my story in words together with data visualization. And you'll see the final piece in a second. And finally, I always thought that the piece was going to be about my story to open with, as well as to make it as a personal, relatable account, but it should include snippets of stories of other people dealing with long COVID. And so this is a sample of a Google form that I created, asking people from the long COVID community to respond to one simple prompt. I hope I will be able to blank again. So I pitched it to The Guardian, The Washington Post, and The New York Times, and surprisingly for me, all the three publications wanted to publish it. But when I heard from Jeremy, the graphics director for the opinion at The New York Times, I felt in my gut that it needed to be published there. I really loved the way that they didn't give me any boundaries for the interactivity that I could use. So a few months of work and 87 hours of fact-checking later, we published it. It's been a crazy intense fact-checking process where, again, incredible fact-checkers from the New York Times talked to my doctors, went through my medical records, my bills, and checked every word that I put on paper. Like, but when you say dizzy, what do you really mean? To the point that I'm like, yeah, it's just that. Anyway, I'm really glad that they did it. But so with my team at Pentagram, we designed and developed the whole visual narrative that I'm about to show you. The piece starts with color brushes, as I mentioned, that surrounds the title, 1,347 Days, My Life with Long COVID. As you start to scroll and read the piece, and you will scroll the essay, you start to understand that every color brush stroke represents a symptom. So purple for fatigue, pink for temperature dysregulation, greens for chills, and so on. And you start to understand that the brush stroke aggregate by day. There's also in the piece a body figure that gets overwhelmed with the total amount and type of symptoms that I've experienced in the 4 years. And then, you keep scrolling and you read the story, but after some scrolls, as you keep reading my story in words, you put it all together as you'll see a calendar that starts in 2020 and keeps going until the end of 2023, which is the publication dates, that gets filled with these color brush strokes and annotations that help you contextualize what happened, my vaccines, my reinfections, understanding that every single day, some of us go through a litany of never-ending symptoms and, in consequence, hard and real limitation in our daily life. Ultimately, understanding that for some of us, really life changed dramatically after we got COVID. And on the calendar, there are additional symbols that represent everything else that I tracked. This is another part of the scrolling. When you start to see that there's an actual account of the many doctors I saw, the several treatments I tried, the hospitalizations, the tens of thousands of dollars I paid for my care, and so on. And as the essay concludes, there's a call to action for funds for research and better awareness, but also what I shared for you before, thousands of people from the long COVID community who responded to that prompt. I hope I'll be able to, again, and these white little papers are filled with hopes from people who are dreaming of walking their dog again, playing with their children, get back to work, or simply being independent and free again. And we concluded a collective hope that we could all start living with a blank canvas full of possibilities again. So I got very lucky, and the Times offered me a full double spread in their Sunday printed opinion supplement last December. The piece has been acquired as part of the permanent collection of the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, and I will even give a TED Talk about the piece in September. This is admittedly a little bit of a preview, the first time that I actually talk about the piece in public. But the reason that I wanted to share this today is that the response to the piece has been incredible. Thousands and thousands of people living with chronic illnesses or caregivers of patients who messaged me and told me that for the first time they feel seen. They have something to send to their loved one and their friends to make them understand what they're really going through. These are some quick snapshots of some of the comments and messages. But what also surprised me is that the piece moved doctors and researchers who took the time to write me, most of them saying that they will rethink how they address their patients on a daily basis and in their studies. So I think data has the power to move people if we use them correctly, if we tell personal stories with them, and perhaps even if we render them in the right visual way, design-wise. Well, as for me, I'm doing better. At times, people see me and see that I'm around and I look good, and therefore they think that I'm cured. But unfortunately, this is a chronic illness, and it's also called an invisible illness in a way. But I am doing better. I'm here, which is something to celebrate, and I do have hope. I still keep a spreadsheet, but since the beginning of this year, my spreadsheet is a different one. In fact, I'm trying only my progress, the things that I'm able to do, the little wins and victories. I've retired my smartwatch, which truthfully was only giving me bad news about my work, my health in terms of heart rate and so on. And these are my new main categories, what I was able to do every day, movement that I was able to do, other wins, what I've been grateful for. These are some of my few wins that I know might look really small, such as going out to dinner with my partner, doing 15 minutes of gentle yoga, eat a dumpling without some of my preventive medications to avoid reactions, walking to the subway in the morning. So physical activity and exertions are still the biggest trigger for long-lasting symptom for me, which is sad as I've always been a pretty active person. But recently, together with a health coach who's an expert in chronic illnesses, I started to run again for lengths of time that might look ridiculous, 45 seconds every 2-3 days. Like you see here where I've shared my victory in a group chat of all the people, well, a few people focusing on their recovery and progress. But to conclude, I believe there's a bigger message here for all kind of data and for all kind of places we choose to put focus on in our lives. The data that we choose to look at, or the bits of your life we choose to look at, if you don't want to call them data, I think are the ones that ultimately tells the stories that make us us. And I do believe in my recovery now. It might be far away in time, but believing that it can happen and imagining it and visualizing it every day and focusing on the process and the progress, it's the first step in that road, I think. So thank you. Thanks.
Wow, amazing. Giorgia, how are you feeling?
I'm all right, thank you.
Okay. You know what feels really good? A round of applause. Another round of applause. Let's hear it for Giorgia Lupi.
Thank you.
I mean, that's the nice thing to do. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I want to lay some ground rules a little bit for Q&A. So we've got approximately an hour here to chat with Giorgia. The students in my large format classes know this about me. I'll bring index cards to class for moments like this. So you'll find index cards here on the tables in front of you. If you have a question, particularly if it's about recovery, please write it on the card, and there are ushers on the side who can pick them up. And we're going to make this work, and it's going to be fine. We'll pick them up halfway through the Q&A, and I can pull them up here in the second half. So imagining you as a young data collector in your grandmother's tailor studio, sorting buttons and ribbons and things like that. When did you become self-aware of yourself as a data collector? And when did you think that it was okay to think of that as a proper vocation or something to do for your life?
Much later in life, actually, like really much later in life. I not even until after college, to be honest. I studied architecture, and at the time, architecture for me was sort of like similar to data visualization. I didn't know that data visualization was a thing, but architecture for me was a way to merge like scientific rules, numbers, some ground that felt, again, a little scientific with creative expression. In the end, when you think about an architectural building, you design the flow of the people, you design a floor plan, so there was a certain amount of creativity in there. And like at the end of my architectural studies, I got really intrigued into urban mapping, which is in a way the science of mapping what's going on in the city and planning. And that, I think, is where I really started to think of myself as a data person, because I was really so interested in these layers of the city that you can use to analyze and then to plan the city one layer at a time. And then, of course, you think about it in retrospect and, you know, talking to my mom, then we were like, well, you know, yeah, I've always been a data collector. Yeah.
But you gave yourself permission to continue doing that, which I think a lot of people would have said, okay, you know, maybe this is not forever. Then this is, I mean, because you take it to a level where it's a style. It's beyond just a technical thing. Like it's bordering on an art form.
Yeah, well, I think, like, getting back to even the data collection part, I mean, I think throughout my life I've collected data, but I thought that it was really, as I mentioned before, my form of journaling. I'm not a great writer. I don't do well with writing. Like, writing the long COVID piece and writing the text for that was so much harder than designing the whole thing for me. So I think my way of being comfortable with writing is actually writing in Excel cells and just make it organized in a way that it doesn't really have to be this like pure form of writing, but more jotting down thoughts that are already organized. And I think I also personally take a lot of pleasure and I'm soothed by or having things organized and having things organized in that way. So I think like there's the personal level to that. But then I think that progressively, again, I really thought about data as a really incredible tool to tell stories. And I feel that to me, the visualizations is just the end part. It's very, very much about the stories that you want to tell and how you can craft, quantitative information together with qualitative information to make people move and relate. And I mean, we can talk about that.
Yeah. We should. There's something about the work that you do that seems surprisingly meditative. So when you look at it in aggregate, all the work together, there's something seemingly meditative. The project for Moleskine, which, I use months of sewing and things like that. Is that a central part of your creative process and your design process?
Well, I feel, again, it starts with the data collection. Because my data collections are very detailed and because I tend to over-collect to the point that I want to have all of the data collected possible, then I think that everything that I do is kind of crazy laborious to be able to visualize the data that I collect, which are, again, admittedly a little too much. They're obsessive. And I think that then you see that meditative quality probably because there's this like constant repetition, but also a symbol is never just like a one little symbol. There's extra details, extra layers of symbols for another type of category that I collect, like you've probably seen in the spreadsheet for the long COVID piece. So again, I think that the visuals are always a reflection of the data that I collect.
And for me, it's somewhere between meditative, and also obsessive, right? So there's,
yeah, I said it. You can say it.
That's remarkable. But you're able to keep it going. So like in terms of recovery and the act of recording that data during this process of having long COVID, was that almost obsession something that helped keep you going, just in the investment in that content?
It's interesting because I feel that in the first part, again, now I'm just collecting progress, it's different, but tracking daily symptoms up to a certain point in my health journey helped me have a semblance that at some point I could piece it all together. And maybe that I'll find a doctor that will see all my correlation and will have a ha-ha moment. So I think it was my way to be like, I really care about this. I care about my recovery. I care about my health. I'm going to do everything that is in my ability to record these fluctuating symptoms. Because the truth is that when you have just 15 minutes with a doctor and you have to recall everything that's been going on for the past however many months, or when you see a new doctor, it made me feel just much more sane and secure and safe to have that account that I could just refer to. And at times, I've also shared the spreadsheet with some of my doctors. And I remember in the beginning, when I started, in the very beginning, I actually would print out my spreadsheet because it was still short enough in the first few months so you can print it out. But I'd go into a doctor's office and I'd get these two types of reaction. The first one is like, this person's completely crazy.
I was going to say, you sound like the worst patient ever. But yes.
But the second reaction is, wow, if all my patients could be so organized, can I have the access to the actual spreadsheet? So, I like
maybe
the second kind
patient.
of doctors
okay.
better.
Great. Okay, perfect. But I love this notion of you're seeing your work in the world, presumably for the first time. Like, oh my God, somebody's reading my article. Here it is. Can you talk about the reception of your work and how important that is in the kind of feedback?
And in terms of reaction to my work, well, I know that my work's not for everybody. Probably my work is not for somebody that wants to just flip a page and learn something in 10 seconds. I think it's rich and it requires engagement. And I always make this example that it really depends on the goals. If I had to design a dashboard for a pilot to land a plane, I would never ask them to read a legend. I would do green and red and, that's it. But sometimes, especially when you're in cultural settings, on a newspaper, on a museum, or when you can really have people's time and attention, I think data visualization shouldn't be a simplification of the world, but should be a way for people to access the different layers of complexity of the world. So that's why sometimes it's kind of intricate.
The notion of nuance is very important to your work. When you showed those animations of the op-ed, the kind of coverage over time of the document and filling it up and the gesture, right, is very much a part of the work. We don't associate that typically with data visualization, right?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, nuances, I feel every data set pretty much should have nuances. And getting back to what data is, I mean, data is primarily human-made, and I know that people might roll in their eyes, but even if you think about it, like even if it comes from a sensor, a human being designed the sensor and decided what to collect and what to leave out. So in a way, every data set is subjective. And I think the more that it comes to personal data, then it's very individualized. And even if we have the same smartwatch that, records the same metrics, but the context of our lives are fundamentally different. What we care about in these like scores that we get every morning is very different. And I think that sometimes, again, especially when it comes to this type of data, the representation itself also should be nuanced. And I feel that, again, especially in this type of data, if you read like a very clear, graphically neat 52 versus 57 bar chart, you tend to think that that's also the perfect reality and very precise. But again, rarely data are. And so that's why when I can, I try to render it with visualization.
But sometimes you're operating in a world, I think, frankly, our world at times, increasingly, that can't process nuance. Things are black or white. And talk about what does your work do in a world of black and white? What does your world do in a world that can't see those fuzzy edges anymore?
Well, I still think that my work is the colors in between. I don't think that anything is for everybody, and I really know that that's okay for me. And I probably found my niche of client and people that like my work. And also, I think my work, as everybody's work, is evolving and will evolve. And maybe will come a time that'll be a little bit more black and white. But I still find that I would like to find a place for colors.
And I used the word art earlier. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
But can you talk about, I know you like to self-identify as a designer, but the relationship between art and design, when I look at that work, it really does blur the boundaries for me.
Yeah, I feel that in many times, because I've been working on artistic commissions, people say, oh, you're an artist. And I really don't see myself as an artist. I see myself as a designer. I thrive with constraint that sometimes I give to myself, even when the projects are mine. I thrive on collaboration. And I think, all of my work, even if it looks like it's me, like it's rarely just me. It's really like a team of people. And I really like working with clients. I love like being their partner in either solving their problems or telling their stories. And I also am somebody that really just doesn't personally thrive in being at home alone with a blank canvas. I think I really don't. So for all these very individual reasons, I define myself as a designer. But you're right. I mean, the boundaries are kind of fuzzy, and sometimes the outputs are overlapping as well. So to me, it is really a bit more about the profession itself individually rather than, oh, is this art or is this design necessarily?
You're painting a picture of a person who would really not enjoy 1,374 days in isolation and dealing with this. Can you talk about what that meant for you in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I've been miserable. Like, believe me, I am a very extrovert person. I used to be very active, very social, out all the time. I mean, I live in New York and I love New York. And for a long time, I mean, I still have limitations. I can't do everything that I want to do, but I'm here. I hang out with people. I have also stopped wearing a mask in public all the time. I wear a mask in public transportation. I have these sprays that I use when I'll be like in the middle of people because still I don't want to get reinfected, but also at some point, for my mental health and possibly even for my recovery, I needed to stop living like if it was 2020, like a year ago. And so together with my partner, we've been deciding to okay, let's live like that again. Let's try to live again. But yeah, it's been absolutely traumatic, and I still live with a lot of fear. And even if I'm here and I'm traveling to Boston and all of that, to be honest, every choice that I make might have consequences. Because one of the hardest thing of this illness and disease is what it's called post-exertional malaise. And the word malaise doesn't even start to make justice to what it is. Sometimes if you exert yourself too much, or if you do something that, again, is too much for what you can handle at the moment, you can make yourself being in bed, unable to get up for months. So every choice is very, needs for me to be weighted. And I think that this kind of trauma will probably stay with me for a long time. And I know I seem like a very cheerful person, and I think I am, but it's been really, really hard.
Well, we do appreciate you being here. I want to talk about data humanism and this sort of framework. I think when I look at the audience here after a couple of days, a lot of framework lovers here in the audience. Is there a framework lover here? There's one person yesterday who like completely was, yeah, it was you. Hi. Mm-hmm. She's back. Hi. This is sort of a manifesto, right? But it's a delightful manifesto at the same time. And you're partly taking a world that I think for many of us, we think of data as really big and maybe scary, looming. It's certainly uncertain or has been processed, and you make it intimate and small. And can you talk about what that does both for your creative practice, but more importantly, as a manifesto, you're meant for that to extend to other people and for people to take hold of it creatively?
Yeah. So again, I started it for myself. It's almost like after 10 years of practice at that point, 8 years of practice, I felt that I needed to systematize what I do and why I do it in a way. And I was asked to write an article in print magazine, a graphic design publication about my work. And I thought that that was going to be like a good moment to have a set of some principle around it. And so I started to think about embracing complexity as one of the principles, but also, embrace beauty, and beauty as a beautiful access to like things that then can get you curious about a topic and all of that. And also the idea of going beyond standards, because I rarely just rely on bar charts and pie charts per se. And as I started to put down those principles, I thought that then there was something bigger that was maybe interesting for all kind of data. And especially in an age of big data and everything that gets processed electronically only, like what Dear Data, the project of the postcards, taught me is really that to get closer to the very nature of data, maybe removing technology is something that is helpful, because then it fundamentally comes down to the human questions that you want to ask to the data, as opposed to what's already there, what's already in form of a spreadsheet, what's already being collected and processed. And of course, that manifesto is a bit of a provocation, because I say small data versus big data, but it's just really to start to think about the very nature of data. And in terms of big and small, I don't think that our brain can process big data. We are like human beings with a finite way of visualizing and processing dimensions. And so I think that in any case, starting with small data and small units that can give you a sense of what you can possibly have if you expand, especially as a designer, can also help you find what I call like a visual model that is very customized for the type of data you're working with, as opposed to just relying on, you have data that are very different, but then you cram them all into a bar chart, all into a pie chart, all into a chart that is just easy and it's already there. And I don't think that that makes justice to the data sets and the stories. And
in addition to the creative work you do, the design work, you're also being asked to be on Royal Society of the Arts and things like that, this new notion of new metrics. Are you trying to promote this notion of data humanism into those arenas to help those organizations rethink the way traditionally they've worked?
Well, if they engage with me, I think it's maybe because they appreciate my approach. But I tend to not necessarily evangelize or share how people should think. I think that when they have a specific problem that they're asking me to help with, I usually tend to give my approach and to work following my approach. But I also think there's space for everything. I mean, I rarely work onto business analytic tools for internal monitoring of companies' processes. I mean, I think that there's a space for instead just really working on big data kind of standard visualization for some of those things. I don't know. I feel that most of the times, the context that I work on are communication contexts where there's a story to tell and it can be told through data. But again, it's not necessarily that my work is for monitoring purposes only. So I really feel that those nuances in terms of the context are kind of important. And even the reason why I decided to join Pentagram, which is a brand identity company, is because what interests me is the possibility for data to be a language that we can all speak, to be a tool to tell stories, rather than just, again, a tool that can make us more optimized and efficient, which we already know that it can be.
So I'm glad you brought up Pentagram, or at least the design industry specifically in consulting, because I think in consulting, we've seen probably over the last 10 or 15 years, a lot of consulting firms also try to figure out data science and bring it in. And there's been a lot of failures, a lot of attempts that have blown up. They haven't worked. In some sense, you embody the fusion of those two things together. But when you look at the landscape and you look at the industry, basically, the consulting world, Where do you see this going in the future beyond your own work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that even if we just think about design agencies, every client of Pentagram or of a design agency virtually right now uses data, whether it is to communicate to their client because they're a data company or whether it's just, again, for internal purposes. And so I feel that even if we think about a rebranding, it's something that can help a brand tell a story that their audience can relate to. I mean, data is involved somehow. And I feel that for every designer right now to at least be data savvy, that I don't think that everybody should be a data visualization designer, but really understanding what it means to collect data, what it means for a company to base their decisions on this data, what it means for a client or a customer to have their data collected by the brand. I mean, I think it's very fundamental. I mean, I just really think that then you'll be able to apply whatever kind of design, storytelling, campaign, branding in a savvier way.
And the work that you've showed, particularly the Visual OpEd, this is a design research conference, right? Yeah. And I think many people probably, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, that's not academic research. It's not. It's very personal research. But what do you think an academic community or traditional design researchers can understand or take away from some of this work?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I got contacted by quite a few researchers and doctors and practitioners. And I think my point with the piece was not to say this is how long COVID exactly looks like, but it is to really share what it feels like in general and how with only a few medical encounters that you have, because you can't be at the doctor every day, and with a doctor only, or a researchers even in long COVID, seeing a patient only in a few very limited moment of time, I think what's going on in between in the days of the patient is probably missed, because we have electronic medical records that are this moment in time when we go get our labs and we have those numbers and we can see the trends in our labs, but those are usually after a few months apart at least, or a year apart. But what's going on in between, especially with chronic illnesses, is really important. And I think that what can researchers take? I mean, if only some researchers I'm not talking about design researchers, but medical researchers could really take this illness seriously and chronic illness seriously because they see what it really means on a daily basis, as opposed to hearing from you when you go there that you're more fatigued than usual, well, that's a win. In terms of design research, I mean, isn't design research about finding new ways to communicate a particular problem? And I feel that maybe, we haven't seen a ton of visualizations that are so nuanced in the medical field. And so maybe if we think about that project as a bit of a, research project, probably it's about how can we actually communicate that thorough account of life.
Of your life in this case, yeah. I'd like to take some questions from the audience. So I don't know if anyone has been through to collect the cards that are out there, but if anybody has one, they want to walk it up, just walk up to the stage, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to read it. Thank you. All right, you're the first one. That was really efficient. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you wish more people, and perhaps especially designers, understand about data gathering and production?
What do I think that most people could understand about data gathering and production? I mean, I feel something that I already share, that data is so human-made and it can be small and it can be really a beautiful narrative material that I think that everybody, even if they feel intimidated by data, they could start small. They could start by thinking, okay, I have a week of something to collect. What do you want to collect? You can even collect something that has to do with the weather, something outside. And then it's very easy, in a way, I didn't go into anything technical, but to translate quantities into lengths of a line, for example, or categories into a color of a symbol. And so even then building a small legend for yourself and starting to experiment on how you can make a poster out of it. Like something so small, I think starts to make people more confident with using data. And then if you're very interested, of course, there's a whole profession and courses on how to become a data visualization designer. But I really feel that even before we think about data, but thinking about rule-based design and how I can translate some numbers and qualities into symbols can be a really powerful tools for designer in general. We have so many.
Okay, I'm going to read this one. Dear Giorgia, I dealt with long COVID, was sick at the very beginning of the pandemic, but I also suffered a traumatic accident, and it was your data project that inspired me to look at the positive moments in my recovery. So there's that. The question, how did you find the energy to collect and visualize such large amounts of data?
Well, first of all, whoever it is in the audience, I'm really, really sorry, and I empathize. I know that the journey of living with a chronic illness, at least for me, has been the loneliest things I've ever experienced. And so I know that there's this really big isolating factor, both because you're too sick to do anything, but because the people around you, as much as they can and want to try to understand, it's really, really hard to relate. So I'm really sorry, and I'm glad that my piece could provide some, maybe at least make you feel a little less lonely. Well, collecting the data, it's something that I just logged on, even when I was in bed, I had my spreadsheet that was already set up with all the categories, and so all that I had to do was filling in what was going on for the day. So it was a relatively low amount of energy that I needed to spend. And then how did I visualize it? I mean, I'm really lucky that I work with a team at Pentagram, and so I sketched out the whole pitch, I sketched out the idea, I worked on the brushes and how I wanted them to be like, but then my team really helped me out. And I feel that especially, well, first of all, as I said before, in terms of design, I love collaborating, and I always bring a team into whatever I want to do, even if it's highly personal, such as this piece. But then, I mean, they truly helped out, as in I had different projects going on, and it was really also at a moment where I was feeling pretty sick. So I have to say, it's like really kudos and thanks to my team. But I whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're doing better, and I hope that recovery is really happening for you.
So we all watched your response, and when you started, you were clearly emotional, right? And then as you talked about your creative process, your tone changed. Mm. And then you leveled out and were able to kind of deliver the point. Was that a microcosm of this thing that you experienced? Because you just happened right here.
Well, I feel that, for me, publishing the piece was kind of like coming full circle to a part of my illness. Now, will I ever fully recover? I don't know. I might have this chronic illness forever. I might have remitting and relapsing moments. But I think that designing the piece was also something that empowered me. And I felt that, especially because it was going to be published in the New York Times, and so it was going to be very visible. I really hoped that it would make people feel less lonely and alone. And it gave me a purpose. It gave this whole illness, I mean, I don't want to say that it changed people's lives at all, but it gave these all 4 years a little bit of a meaning, if you will. And so, yeah, probably as soon as I started to truly design it, I also felt a little bit of relief in the emotional burden that I've been carrying.
So we're going to shift to maybe something a little bit lighter. How do you visualize data? How do you visualize data so it does not look like a boring graph? Question mark and like desperate, please help me.
Okay, so I think that, so if you think about, boring graphs like pie charts, bar charts, it's really mostly aggregated data. So we're taking a lot of granular data points that could be so beautiful to visualize just by themselves, and we aggregate them, put them together, and cram that into those forms that we already know. And I think that when you do have disaggregated data, which means you do have the data points and they're interesting to visualize, that is the way in which a data set comes alive. And sometimes it's good to aggregate because you want to know, what's going on every quarter over time, and you see it and you have it and it's great. But I think that having data that is not necessarily only aggregated but can speak to the granular individual data point is one way. And then again, if you can influence the data collection when you speak to your clients or when it's personal data collection, honestly, the more that you add context. And so, imagine dear data is simple. Again, the moments that you complain. Well, one postcard could have been just one tally after another for, 57 times I complained that week, probably even more, 100 or something. But that would have been not only a boring visualization, it would have been a boring story. But instead, for every complaint, adding details about what was I complaining about? Was it the technology, the cold, the heat, or who was I complaining to? And was it really necessary? And what did it teach about myself? Not only crafted a more interesting visualization, because then every little layer of these categories that I'm talking about had a particular symbol, but it also told a much more interesting story. So I feel in general, the more that we can add context and then, visual and content-wise, the more these visualizations are less boring.
I hope that was helpful. Yes.
Yeah.
So I like this question. What do you say to a slow data skeptic?
Slow data
skeptic. Is that right?
Well, I mean...
Did somebody write that? Yes. Slow data skeptic.
Well...
Yeah. So I can imagine, as a consultant, I can totally imagine like somebody calling, I'm a client, I'm calling bullshit on that. Oh, slow data, I don't have time for that. Like, you've already got it figured out, use AI or something to just crunch the numbers and make it happen.
That's great.
What do you say to someone like that?
That's great, do it.
Go for it. Okay.
Go for it. No, I mean, in general, though, I feel that, again, I said it before, there's a spectrum, like an infinite spectrum on how much you can allow yourself and your audience to go into details and to be slow. Imagine the long COVID piece. If the long COVID piece was, okay, I'm aggregating all the time that I logged fatigue, 1,000. All the times that I logged headache, 1,010. All the times that I logged nausea, 800. I don't know that the story would have been so interesting, or also that people could relate. And so I feel that sometimes there's space for slow and imperfect and very personal data. Some other times there isn't. And I feel that in all kind of design, there's a spectrum. Even if you think about designing a logo and thinking about a brand, I mean, just like, because to make it a little broader, before you start a branding project, like you start with position. Do you want it to be fresh? Do you want it to be trustworthy? Do you want it to be, feeling old school or feeling completely disruptive? And that's a spectrum. And I think all the answers are okay, depending on the goal of this company. And I think that is true as well for data visualization.
Yeah, it gives me a little bit of a nightmare thinking about the client who's going to be coming to you, knowing who you are, but then also confronting you with this. So it may not happen in a client scenario, but I can imagine many contexts in which that would happen.
I feel that, I've been also lucky in my profession, because I feel that a client that is like, well, I wanted to do it with AI and quick, simply wouldn't come to me. So it's like self-selected in a way.
Self-selecting.
Yeah.
So I like this question because I was curious about this myself. Thank you, Giorgia. These are like little love letters.
I want them all after.
Your data collection and design beginnings were closely related to textiles, a craft that demands a significant time investment. How have textiles influenced your craft? And we see your experimentation there too.
Yeah, well, I love anything that is textile. So at some point, one of the most fun projects I worked on was a fashion collection that I designed for the brand And Other Stories, which is part of the H&M group. And it was 15 pieces of garments that told the stories of these 3 women who were pioneers in male-dominated field, blah, blah, blah. It was really, really beautiful. And I find anything that is tactile, even before than textile, that you can do with data, something super fulfilling. And I feel that in general, as much as we're on our phone every day and we have like thousands of things that are happening digitally, I don't know, maybe this is generational and you all are so young and will not relate to this, but I feel that we remember more the things and the pieces that we actually can touch. And I feel that there's such a value still right now into having some artifacts that are purely like analog and materic, physical in a way. So in general, honestly, like I'm designing another textile piece. It's a bit of a preview. It's going to be a data-driven jumpsuit for a friend of mine who has a company in New York. Then she makes beautiful jumpsuits. And I would love to design at least one textile piece a year. I worked on a data rug before as well. That actually the data points of this whole striped rug, again, I don't know if it was shown, were about the history of endangered and lost textile techniques. So I even was digging deep into the history itself. So I don't know. I think that maybe partially because both my grandmothers were seamstresses, I have that gene of wanting things to be.
I'm fascinated by it. This is a great question, I think, for this audience. When thinking about your own body as a source of data, what sort of practices do you have to protect yourself? So similar to sort of protecting subjects.
Well, I used to wear a smartwatch all the time, and so I used to, and like a Whoop band like you have, and I had like also an Apple Watch to track different kind of things. I feel that to be really honest, I haven't thought about protecting myself from this data until the moment when I decided to only focus on the positive things. And this might be not what the question really is about, but for me, I really started to also notice that, I would wake up and feeling not so crappy, but then I would look into my Whoop Band app and it said, you slept crappy, your heart rate variability is super low, your heart rate was very high, blah, blah, blah. And I started to really influence myself and say, actually, no, I don't feel so well. You do it, I think. And so I feel that at some point, as much as it felt very strange to rip it off and take it off, but it was very liberating. And I think that to me was the first form of protection that is not necessarily protection in terms of the data that I'm sharing with the company, but protection from how the data can actually influence how you think.
Yeah, I think, I presume the question was even more from a technical, perhaps from a more technical perspective, which is like the recording the data and the preservation of the data. And obviously it's just you in your, I presume in your bedroom, keeping it, but it's also how you handle that data is also something to potentially think about.
How I handle the data in terms of how I analyze it or how I store it or how I think about it.
Maybe all of that. You use the word material, right, when you're referring to data. And I think whether the data, when it's that sort of intimate and almost like I imagine you touching the data, it becomes tangible. That's kind of a different level.
But I think that if you think about it, as I mentioned, I don't journal per se, but if anybody keeps a journal, that's the similar level, I think, of very intimate, personal, can be material or physical if you do it on paper. And so it is about, it's an artifact, it's ultimately a story, it's a memory that you create for yourself in the future. I think it really has the form of journaling for me.
Some people, this is another question, some people in recovery refer to it more as a discovery. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Indeed, I feel one of the things that I've been discovering in recovery, it might sound really banal, but then you hear it from people that recover from illnesses, but how much my whole life I've just been taking for granted things that I shouldn't, such as the ability to walk, the ability to be free to make a decision that doesn't have consequences, the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, and still it for it to be fine. And I think that I don't think I'll ever take it for granted anymore. And so definitely, I think there's a discovery of what makes life what it is, which I don't think necessarily is what we have, what we own, but it is the freedom of really just being without having limitations. And that's a new discovery. What else? I feel...
Were you hearing, so many people reached out to you.
Yeah.
How did they respond? What are some of the different things that they maybe saw in you that they were kind of mapping against themselves?
I feel like really truly the overarching average message was really beautiful all the time. It is, thank you, because finally I have one thing to really send to my families, my friends, to make them understand what I'm going through. Or also some others that told me, a lot of my friends have sent me your piece and said, I'm sorry that I didn't reach out. I had no idea that this is what you were going through. So I really just think that sometimes by seeing it and seeing how it looks like, and in this case in form of data primarily, because I didn't publish any of my photos of me in bed in the piece, intentionally. Not because I was scared of privacy or anything, but because I thought that people probably could identify a little more if they didn't see a face and only saw the story panning out through data.
So the photos that you showed here were not in the actual article?
Piece. No, okay. I showed them for context. I put them in the pitch to, because, in the pitch I started with, this is me and all the accolades and the stuff, but this is also me, with the photo of me just pretty much being not able to function.
I'm curious about the reception to that pitch because, there they are. Yeah. There you are. The reception of the pitch, had they, what did they tell you about that? Was this something unique that, had anybody else been doing this? Are there there could be thousands of people potentially tracking their symptoms like this, but you didn't.
Yeah, well, I feel maybe I've also been lucky in the unluckiness of not only I've been tracking my data, but I happen to have a team that can help me visualize them this way. And this is what I do for a living, so it's not really only about tracking, but it's also being able to find a visual way to tell the story. So as I mentioned, I pitched it to the Washington Post, the Guardian, and the New York Times, and they all said yes. And I think it's because long COVID has been a topic that has been out there, but with pretty much two type of literature. One, there are these like form of blog posts, which is similar to my story, but only told through words, and others that are just like new research on long COVID shows X, Y, and Z. But probably from a patient perspective, again, a daily account of that has never been seen. And I decided to go with the Times. Honestly, I mean, I'm in New York, and so the Guardian also was in the UK, and it was a little less easy for me to just necessarily relate to the audience that I had, but primarily because of technical limitations. So with the New York Times, I could do whatever I wanted. With the Guardian and the Washington Post, they were actually this sort of like format that I had to follow. I couldn't necessarily have the text interact with the brushes that I had in mind, and so. But all the three editors that I spoke with just really said this deserves to be published, and I'm just very honored.
I'm glad it was.
Yeah.
I'm going to use maybe switch back to your architectural brain a little bit, which is going back in time. There's a question about, can data help designing spaces or buildings that can actually help healing people? Not in terms of numbers, but through the collection of experiences.
Interesting. I think so. Even if I think about the data that I collected or that some long COVID patients might be collecting. I mean, for example, there's a lot of us that at times have experienced visual disturbances and extreme sensitivity to lights. And if you really see that a certain type of the population, for example, even if it's not their primary symptoms or manifestation, but have that feature, well, then you can start designing spaces differently. I feel that especially when you design spaces that are for healing, whether it's like a particular, branch of a hospital or anything, honestly, really having a deep knowledge of what the patients are going through as opposed to relying on standards of how usually you do an OR together, like, close to whatever flow. This is great already programming, but I feel that maybe if we had more patient-collected data that can be given to architects who specialize in healthcare spaces, definitely. I mean, again, I'm not a practicing architect, and so I've really never practiced architecture, but I think in general it'd be super valuable.
Yeah, I wonder if that's happening nearly enough.
You can inquire.
I think that's the whole field that you could start to enter.
Yeah.
This might be a timely question, given that we're getting to the end of our time here. There's a temporal element There's a temporal element to your data collection. Do you have an endpoint in mind when you start? How do you find it? And I think you could extrapolate that to your entire life too.
I feel that, again, it depends on what you're collecting. With the Dear Data project, for example, we knew that it was going to be 52 weeks. We knew that we wanted to do it for a year, and the format itself was one different type of data point every week. So we kind of designed the whole thing, and we even designed the 52 weeks in terms of topics to be able to paint a portrait of the other person. So mapping our activities, our thoughts, our surroundings, the interaction with our partners. So that was very pre-planned. But I think many collections, so for example, when I started to collect data on my long COVID journey, I wish I didn't have to collect them for 4 years. I wish that the data collection could just have finished much earlier, because that would have meant for me not to suffer. So I think some of these are open-ended. Right now that I'm tracking this progress, I feel that if I keep feeling that this progress is going, at some point maybe I will not need to collect anymore. I don't know. I feel that most of the times when you're doing personal data collection to discover something about yourself, I don't think that there's necessarily an ending point. The data collection will evolve, will end, will change, but it's hard to pre-plan it, to say, I want to really discover this about myself, but I'm only going to do it for 2 months. But at other times when you are doing it, say, for a project, and again, your data or the moleskin, I had to deliver it at a certain point, and so that there's a temporal element by default.
I can only imagine it's terrifying when you do a document that tracks every day of your life from the beginning to now, if you take that that was a great question, whoever asked that question. Final question I want to ask you is, towards the end of your talk, you said that data has the power to move people if we use them correctly, if we tell personal stories with them, and perhaps even if we render them in the right way visually. Can you share your hopes for what data can do for us as we look to the future of design?
Yes. I mean, I think that probably what you've seen about data tonight and today is that data can make us more human in a way, because it can help us access bits of our lives that if we don't pay attention in that kind of very one subject at a time way, we might miss. And I think that is what I hope, that all kind of data, even the one that will be processed by AI or generated by devices, will ultimately allow us to put in the nuances that makes us us.
Giorgia, thank you so much for all of your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Design As is a podcast from Design Observer. For a transcript and show notes, you can visit our website at designobserver.com/designaz. You can always find Design As on any podcatcher of your choice. And if you like this episode, please let us know. Write us a review, share it with a friend, and keep up with us on social media at Design Observer. We'd love to give you a seat at our roundtable however we can. Special thanks to Maxine Philibon at the Northeastern Recording Studio and Design Observer's Editor-in-Chief, Ellen McGirt. This episode was mixed by Judy Bell Kamanian. Design As is produced by Adina Carr.